If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you may remember around 2 years ago when I did the May block design challenge while working on lights, camera, action. I was feeling really burnt out from working on the level, and I needed to regain my motivation. So each day I made a block design based around a new and unique randomly generated prompt. It only took 5 days before my goal was accomplished and I'd regained motivation to finish my level. Well, my motivation for Rosegold is currently at rock bottom. I've never talked about it fully off stream, and I haven't given you all a true update in over a year, so I figured I would mention it really quickly. I currently have around 3 full parts left to complete on Rosegold. I also have to finish another part and polish and playtest the entire level. Yet, as I've gotten closer and closer to the finish line, my progress has become slower and slower. So, it is my hope that by taking a break and working on one-day projects, I may rekindle my motivation just as I did for lights, camera, action. This is going to be a bit different though. Instead of a randomly generated word, I'm going to use a randomly generated color palette of 5 colors, plus white. From this color palette, I will come up with a one-word theme and will utilize only these 6 colors. The final difference is that I will not be restricted solely to block designs and can make whatever I want. You'll see this in action very soon. Alright, without further ado, let us jump into day 1. I use a site called coolers.co to generate my color palettes. I will also choose the first one I get as long as it's not completely boring. As you can see here, I generated a nice palette of teals, blues, and purples. My initial thought when I saw this combination was something water themed. My mind instantly went to aqueducts, and I don't know why. In my head, I pictured the teal being used for water with orange aqueducts and green vines draping over the scene. Basically, I thought of Azimuth by Knots. But very quickly, I realized that I would have to get far more creative. I had no access to oranges or greens and had a very limited color palette. The lack of any warm colors basically prevented any contrast in my scene. I decided that my first step would be to draw my design with pen and paper so I have an idea of what I was going to be working with. This is a process I use for basically anything I add to a level. It helps me visualize assets far better before I begin building. I didn't record myself drawing, but I will go over what I was thinking. My goal was to go for an abstract design that incorporated art elements. This is one of my favorite styles of design, and I thought that it would work very well with the aqueduct theme if I pulled it off correctly. I wanted to emphasize the falling of water, so I went for a very vertical aspect ratio in my concept. I had long aqueduct pillars and tall waterfalls. Additionally, I added arrows pointing down and streaks of water falling. I knew this wouldn't be enough to fill the scene, so I added an astrological compass thing to the background, which I felt fit the theme. I also thought it would be cool to have spindrift water droplets covering the canvas. Finally, I finished off my concept art by incorporating the date and name of the project, something which has sort of become a personal rule of mine. Now that I had a concept I was happy with, I knew it was time to break open the editor. Now, there's something else I must tell you. Another reason for this challenge, apart from helping me to regain my inspiration, is to help me get used to better edit. This was my first time ever using the mod, and while it certainly seems like it will make my life a lot easier in many ways, it does have a learning curve, and one I want to get used to before returning to Rosegold. So, if you see me struggling, this is why. As you can see, my first steps were to work on a gradient background from the lightest teal to the darkest blue. I struggled on this for a while before eventually coming up with something I was happy with. Next, I wanted to get the difficult part out of the way. This meant making the aqueduct. Due to a lack of colors, I couldn't pull off the level of detail I wanted in my concept, but I still managed to get the general shape and perspective as intended, using the bright teal for lighting and the purples for shadows. The column certainly wasn't as pretty as I had hoped, but it was good enough for my purposes. Next, I extended the pillar of water toward the bottom of the scene. It was by complete happenstance that I stumbled upon what would be the best part of this build. I realized that I could do a low poly effect for the white caps of the waterfall, like you see in a lot of indie games. I extended the water detailing to the bottom, and it was looking really good, but it still felt kind of empty. I tried adding gradients, but I quickly realized that this was not the correct approach and would not work well. For now, I moved on to the large water pillar at the side of the screen. I essentially did the same thing as before, except at a larger scale and without an angle. This time, however, I once again found a way to improve the water. By adding a flat, saturated shadow underneath the white parts, it made the water look much nicer and far less empty. I will say, however, that this is technically cheating because the saturated color wasn't on my palette, but who cares, I make the rules anyway. Next, I applied these changes to the other waterfall and things were beginning to look good. Still, I was far from done. Now it was time for the abstract designs. I began with the arrows. I tried out multiple designs as you can see here, but they weren't really working for me. I ended up going back to the standard 4 triangle design, which I was trying to avoid at first, but it ended up looking the best anyway. I used this design alongside both of my waterfalls in the dark blue color to make it stand out. This helped implement some of that verticality I was talking about at the beginning. Next, I began adding the text. I used one of my custom fonts and wrote out 01 Aqueduct. I then turned this to the bright teal color and placed it behind the waterfall as drawn out in my concept. Things were now beginning to progress much faster. My next step was to make the compass design for the background. I made 2 concentric circles with 1 additional small circle in the center. From there, I extended 8 lines in each direction. I left gaps where the lines intersected the circles for aesthetic appeal. Then, at the end of the lines, I added points, just like you would see in a compass rose. This was helping me pull off that astrological feel I wanted, which for some reason seems to always be tied to aqueducts and I don't really know why. Finally, I added multiple small filled circles around the whole design. While the shape itself looked fine, there was another problem. Originally, I set this design to the purple color, and right away I thought it looked awful. However, I couldn't think of an alternative, so I let it be for the time being and moved on to other aspects. Don't worry, I will come back to this later. Next, I dotted around some of the spindrift in the falling water that was beside the pillars. I had to play around with the amounts to get the right feel, but eventually I was happy with the result. I then moved on to the abstract cliché circle patterns that you see in all abstract designs. I placed them around roughly where I did in my concept, but something didn't feel right. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I just didn't like the look of these circles. Regardless, I let them be for the time and come back to them later. My next step was to add additional text in the background in varying different sizes. I started with a large duct, which was obscured by the leftmost pillar of water. Next, I added my name in blue near the top. It was here that I took a step back and realized that I needed to address a lot of issues. The main problem was the colors. They simply didn't look that good. And when I say colors, I don't mean the color palette. That was not the issue. My issue was the application of these colors in the scene. The root of this problem, I instantly realized, were the compasses. Instead of making them the dark purple and bringing them to the forefront, I put them to the backmost layer and made each one the closest color to the background gradient that I could. This meant that I needed to change the color of the text in order for it to stand out. My name was turned white and the large DUCT became the purple that the compasses used to be. Already the scene was looking significantly better, but I had still not solved the problem of the circles. It was now that I realized the issue. Since I was already using circles for the spindrift, additional circles simply looked strange and overcrowded the scene. As such, the issue was not their color, but their shape. To fix this problem, I changed the circles to diamonds, a small change that ultimately made a huge difference. After this change, I was done. I'm going to stop talking for a second and just show the finished result. In the end, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. For a pretty quick build in one day using a restricted color palette, I think it could have gone a lot worse. It definitely brought me out of my comfort zone, and I'm hoping that I improve as I get more used to this new style of creating. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope a small peek into my creating process like this may have proved useful. I hope you like the final product. The total object count is 4,030 objects, as I didn't really attempt to optimize since this isn't going to be used in a level. The time spent in the editor was just over 2 hours, which is probably way more than it should have been, but everybody knows that I'm slow. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow with day 2 of the March Design Challenge. Until next time, see ya.